So for the past few months on stream, I've been playing through all of the Master Chief focused Halo games on Legendary on their original consoles in order to be completely caught up with the entire Master Chief story by the time Halo Infinite comes out. And with all this time put behind the controller, playing through these games on a wide range of hardware, on the hardest difficulty imaginable, on one franchise, I personally would have thought that I wouldn't want to touch another Halo game after playing it through on Legendary for quite a while, but I still come back to Halo CE when I have a free minute and just play through a mission if I have the time, and I still consider Halo CE to be my personal favorite Halo game, and I figured today we'd go into why by going through my top 5 things that bring me back to Halo CE every time. So let's get started. So starting out at number 5 is the art style, and I'm talking about the original art style on the original Xbox, not the PC port and not the god-awful remaster, but the original art style. And yeah, the graphics have aged. They look old, and I'm not going to deny that. However, there are a few things about it that just stand out from any other game of its time. The way the environments that are built tell a story, even outside of the original story, which, spoilers, the story's not going to make it into my top 5 for a couple reasons, but the story is helped along by the art direction and the way that the maps are sort of designed to look. Some environments look almost completely natural, with the exception of a few artificial buildings. Others have this interesting mix of future tech in certain areas, mixed in with the nature. It's a really interesting sort of art style and design. Kind of makes you wonder, before you even knew about the Forerunners or anything of the past of that universe, what was going on. It's kind of interesting. Environmental storytelling is a really cool thing to play with. But the other thing the art style helps with, and I am no game designer by any stretch of the imagination, but one of the things it helps with is identifying what enemies you're coming across before you even fire the first shot. Enemies all have very distinct shapes, movements, and colors, and this was very clearly something that was intentional by the designers, because when you run into an enemy group, you can immediately tell who's the strongest, who's the biggest, who's the smallest, who to go after first, and depending on what weapons they fire and who fires first, you can even tell what weapons they have before you fire the first shot. It's really cool. The simplicity of the art style and the fact that if something's on screen, it's usually there for a reason, really helps this game age extremely well, at least from a style points design, and I will give it all the style points. Now at number 4 is the enemy sandbox. Now I already went into how the different designs of the characters help you understand who you're going against before you fire the first shot, but every enemy is unique, has its own strengths and its own weaknesses. They have the elites with shields, who are supposed to be the player's equals. You have the grunts, who are meant to be cannon fodder, but also have a few little quirks, like if you shoot them, they fumble their grenades and can take out their entire group if they're not careful. You have the jackals, who are a little more defensive and a little more maneuverable, meaning that the player has to be smarter with how they attack, and you can't just dive straight in on a higher difficulty because they very well may take you out because they are just deflecting your shots and you're not landing any damage. The introduction of different enemies is extremely well paced, only ramping up to a very high difficulty at about the midway point and really going all out with both the brilliantly introduced twist enemies of the Flood, spoiler alert, and the Spec Ops elites and the god-awful fuel rod grunts. And really, there's only one enemy type that's just genuinely unfair, and it's not the hunters, because they have that extremely weak spot on their back with one magnum shot, and otherwise are actually pretty formidable enemies. No, it's the god-awful rocket flood. I don't know who thought that was a good idea. And to very briefly touch on this, because I'm not exactly sure how it works, all I know is that it works. The enemy AI is brilliant, and this is something that doesn't seem to have been carried over to newer AAA titles where enemies just sort of stand around waiting to get killed. Enemies move in Halo, they flank. They are actually fairly smart about how they are going to attack you, and especially on harder difficulties, that can make certain levels nearly impossible to make it through on the first try. Overall, the enemy sandbox is a brilliantly rounded group of enemies that is a joy to fight, and really, it's fun when they're firing back at you, and considering Bungie said that a lot, where it's fun to shoot at but also fun to be shot at, I think they achieved their goal. Now, coming in at number 3 is something that really had this game standing out from its contemporaries at the time and still has its own very unique qualities even in 2021, and that is the weapons sandbox. A lot of modern games tend to just have equivalents of snipers for each faction and automatic weapons for each faction and pistols for each faction. You get the idea. There are duplicates of almost every weapon depending on which faction you're playing for, but in Halo CE, there wasn't really a duplicate of any particular weapon. Each weapon had its own unique strengths and weaknesses. For example, people usually think that the plasma rifle is sort of the equivalent to the assault rifle in Halo 1, but in reality, the assault rifle is just good for peppering enemies, but when it comes to shielded enemies, it doesn't do a whole lot of good, and you spend a lot of ammo just taking shields out, whereas the plasma pistol can take shields out really well, but the overall damage of the plasma pistol on unshielded enemies is adequate, but nothing crazy. Generally, if you hold on to one weapon through most of the mission, you'll start running out of ammo at about the halfway point on higher difficulties, and the gameplay and Sandbox in general encourages you to experiment with different weapon combinations. And the fact that this was one of the first games to impose a weapons holding limit of 2 means that you are forced to make the most of whatever you can pick up at the moment. It's pretty cool, and even things like the grenades have pretty interesting attributes, like sticking a grunt has him potentially running straight into a group of enemies to take out more of them. So, fun little things here and there. The only time it's really not fun is when you come across the Flood and all the human weapons are hit scans, so you don't really have a chance to dodge, per se. It's harder, but still not terrible. Now, coming into number 2 is the Silent Cartographer, like the whole mission. This is quintessentially Halo. If you think about Halo CE, usually this is one of the first things you think of. Like, everything I've talked about up till now is on display in this mission. You've got the varied weapons sandbox with all the different enemies. You've got the varied enemy sandbox. You've got the AI of the Marines, assuming they don't all die at the very beginning of Legendary. You have a vehicle section. You have more exploration than I would have known what to do with back in the day. And generally, just the whole thing was the first thing that anybody at Bungie worked on for Halo as a finalized mission, so that would explain why it's the best mission. Now, number 1, for anybody who knows me, is probably not going to be any surprise, but it's the music. If you have ever played any Halo game ever, you will have at least heard this. And there's a reason for it. It is iconic. It sticks with you for one reason or another, and it's brilliant. I love it. But it's not just the main Halo theme, it's the use of these themes throughout the game. And every scenario they play in fits perfectly. I was streaming a couple nights ago, and I went on a rant about how different music fits different scenarios, but if it goes for too long, in the original Halo games, especially CE, it would stop, and you would be left with ambience, because the music is meant to emphasize moments in the game as they happen, and once those moments are over, the music's not really needed anymore.
Let's move down the beach. Keep an eye out for any cargo we can salvage.
Juxtapose that with Halo 4, where the music for one scenario was non-stop playing for the entire 20 minutes that I was stuck in a corner fighting enemies. The fact that they used music in moderation throughout this game really highlights the music and makes it a special moment for the player every single time. And that's just something that you really don't see in a lot of games anymore. And while Marty O'Donnell calls it laziness, the reuse of themes throughout the entire series really helps stitch it all together and make it feel extremely cohesive from Halo 1, from beginning to end, to 2 to 3, the whole deal. The reuse of themes, or laziness as Marty calls it, is just brilliant.
No, actually, this piece of music you're hearing right now, this is the only time it's used in the game.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. So there.
It must be your, your great reuse of themes, Marty. I was recognizing the theme of the music is what I was doing.
Use of themes, yeah. It's just lazy.
And it is easily the #1 reason why I constantly come back to Halo CE. And that's been it, guys. Thank you so much for watching this top 5. I know I usually don't talk about video games, and I'm doing it more and more recently, but I enjoyed this. I hope you guys did too. Let me know in the comments, is there anything that in particular brings you back to Halo CE if you play Halo CE? I'm genuinely curious to know. And apart from that, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave some more comments of things you may want me to do top 5s on that you think I might be interested in or that I could make a top 5 on. And otherwise, that's it. I'll see you guys in the next video. Make sure to be there and have a good one.